All right.
Okay, we're gonna get started. We're 2 minutes from 8:30, so I wanna get started. All right, we're getting started. Okay, I'm gonna do some general acknowledgements because I'm not sure we're gonna have time. This evening, after Mark Reisman's talk, we are gonna get essentially kicked out very quickly out of this room, probably. So I wanted to thank first the DSE, the Dynamic Structural Econometrics group, for partnering with us to host this event. So thank you to Bob, John, Victor, Pedro, and Berto. John unfortunately couldn't be here, but he has been behind the scenes supporting this whole event. In fact, probably more than any of us. And so thank you, John, if you're listening, if you're online. I also want to thank Whitney Newey, not just because he delivered that impressive keynote yesterday in the evening, but also he lectured in the winter school the day before, and he came even earlier to give us regular econometric seminars at HKU. So Whitney has been, I've got a lot of Whitney in the last few days, so I'm still digesting that. But and thank you to him because of his role in the Econometric Society. He's very supportive of the DSE. And so he endorsed this event in Hong Kong, which is the first in Asia. I hope that with this is like a seed event that leads to more things like these, several DSEs in the future. Europe and the US, we have some people from Europe and the US and Canada, but really Asia is a little bit too far to go in the summer to either the US or Europe. So hopefully this spurs more DSE events in Asia in the future. Well, without further ado, of course, I want to also thank our leadership, our great team, Hanming Fang, who has been very supportive of this event and many other things going on in HKU economics, as you know, and our area heads, Xiaodong Xu and Yanghui Wu. Without further ado, I want to get started introducing Hanming. So let me see if I can get some more people in. Ready on their copies. Can you guys shepherd people in? We're about to start. Tell people. All right. So Hanming Fang. So I met Hanming about maybe 20 years ago in Stanford. Obviously, you don't remember Hanming, but we were very young. There used to be, maybe they still going on. Frank Wallach used to run those site structural workshops in the summer. And I was a young PhD student, and one of my advisors was Joe Hudson, Moshe Wojcinski. That's why I know so much about Bob Wheeler and John Brass. But so my advisors took me along to many places, and Moshe put me to Stanford, said, you should come and learn about structural, this Frank Wallach. And there were a lot of very senior structural people there, but among the youngest was Hanming. I think Yas Watanabe maybe was there as well, very young guy at that time. And I was, 5-6 years younger than them. I was just like a little PhD student. And so I hung out with them and I kind of learned what it was to be an assistant professor trying to do structural work. And then I went on to, eventually get a job and try to do that as well. And eventually mix it up a little bit with more reduced form work as well to survive. But I'm a little bit of a hybrid, do both reduced form and structural, but in the structural side, I really, I was inspired a lot by the work by John and Bob. So, and I've used their methods in all my papers. So it's really an honor for us to be able to host this here. And so Hanming, well, it needs no introduction, but let's just do the basic. It's the Norman C. Grossman Professor of Economics at the University of Pennsylvania. He has several other courtesy and joint appointments that I don't have time to do. I'd rather have him give his keynote. He has been a role model for any of us trying to do applied work. In some of our lunches, we often try to claim, Hanming is in our field. So people start to say, no, he's labor. He did all his work in labor early on. Yeah, but now he's IO, or now he's health or public. He also has some very important work in applied theory. So some of the applied theory is also playing him. So you really want to be in that point in your career where every field tries to claim you as your own. So he has been an inspiration for generations and cohorts of particularly Asian students who feel that the US academia is impossible. And I always tell them, look right there, it's possible. And along, of course, many other examples that Hanming has been one of the early ones. And so why don't we all give a big round of applause to Hanming Fang, who's going to deliver his keynote on housing privatization as intergenerational redistribution.
Okay, thank you so much, Huang. You mentioned 20 years ago we met in Saitai. That makes me feel like I'm getting really old. But yeah, but today actually the paper I will present will go back to that era of China where we'll start off. Actually, this is joint work with Kaiji Chen at Emory and Yang Tang at NTU. It's titled Housing Privatization as Intergenerational Redistribution. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here. And I will start off with actually with a graph. I said I will go back to the early years of 1993, all the way to 2022. This is the China's GDP per capita, real GDP per capita growth rate, right? Averaging about 10% for about 21 years. Now it's moved down to about 5%, and eventually, we expect it to slow down further. And I started out in 1993. That's actually the year I graduated from college. And had I stayed in China, I was born in 1972. Actually, my generation is often considered to be the luckiest generation in Chinese history. Right? We didn't go through cultural revolution. We right away, entered college. And back when we entered the labor market, graduated from college, Chinese economy started to take off, right? And I did not stay in China, so I didn't get to enjoy the full economic income growth of China. But think about those who did, but at the same time, there are people who, because of age, had to retire very quickly. It's just a few years after China's economy started to take off, right? So that's my dad's generation. My dad retired in 2000, right? So 6 years into the rapid income growth in China. Now, if you are a social planner thinking about an economy that's about to take off, and you would like, and it will be growing rapidly for another 30 years, the social planner have incentive to transfer some wealth from future generations to the earlier generations, right? This problem is not unique to China. In fact, many emerging economies, Korea, Taiwan, and other, and Japan, all had experienced this rapid economic growth of rapid growth of wage income, followed by an eventual slowdown. In China and in Japan, in Korea, it's when the economy slows down, there's another problem confounded. That's the population age, declining fertility, right? So when the social planner looking at the rapid income growth and wanted to transfer income from future generations to earlier retiree generations, we'll have to think about, okay, one way to transfer income is to introduce a very generous pay-as-you-go pension system. The problem of a generous pay-as-you-go pension system is that, well, what if you make it generous? It's very difficult to make a generous, to reform a generous pension system into a less generous, right? France, is an example of it, right? People will protest on the street when the government tried to increase the retirement age or reduce the pension payments, right? But if the government here introduce a pension scheme that makes my dad's generation being able to enjoy a very generous pension scheme, the worry is that at some point that will no longer be sustainable, right? So what should the government do? So the general question we ask here is, how should the redistribution policy be designed such that these old age cohorts can also enjoy the benefits? And the main idea we explore and we quantify in this paper is subsidized housing purchase during the housing market privatization period can play the role of intergenerational redistribution, right? So housing, of course, is an asset class, right? And if the initial generation, my dad's generation, who retired a few years after the economy take off, were able to get the purchase housing at a subsidized price, Then, a few years later, the housing got floated, right? You can think about this, my dad's generation get the IPO of Chinese housing. Then the IPO got floated to the market, the price take off, and then the capital gains that the early generations can get from the houses they purchased can be used to finance larger houses down the road or consumption, retirement, and so on. So the nice thing about the housing price is that housing price, their asset prices, they incorporate future growth expectation. If the economy growth start to slow down, the housing price growth will start to slow down. If the demographics is such that the old age the fertility start to decline, population start to age, housing price will incorporate that these things, right? So indeed, housing price grew. Housing price grew at I think maybe it's not. Okay, maybe run out of battery. The green lights are off. I'll use this. You can use this. Okay. Right. So indeed, the housing price grew at 10% per year from 1998 until 2018. Actually, until 2021, and then nowadays, of course, China is going through housing market correction. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So let me just, before I go into the model, let me just give you some a contrast between asset price versus pay-as-you-go pension system as intergenerational transfer, right? So like I said, to transfer wealth from future generation to the initial generation in the 1990s via pay-as-you-go pension system, a very generous replacement rate needs to be introduced. And that will be financially unsustainable when the growth rate slows down eventually. And the problem will be exacerbated by the increasing dependency ratio due to population aging. In contrast, asset prices as intergenerational redistribution automatically stops when growth slows down, right? Now, you may say, well, we can index, maybe the pay-as-you-go pension system can index the pension payments to prevailing wages in the future. So, in most of countries, in the US, for example, how much we can get at retirement is related to the earnings history during our work life. Okay, not related to what's the average wage. 20 years later when I'm actually collecting the pension payment. But in some countries like UK and Germany, there is actually some partial index of pension payments to prevailing wages. No country has actually indexed pension payments to old age dependency ratio. Right? So I will do some comparison later with this partial indexing. Okay, so I'm gonna okay. So what we do in this paper is develop a quantitative general equilibrium model to evaluate the distributional impact of and welfare implications from a housing privatization reform. We will incorporate. Many of you might be thinking, they might still have some ideas about what happened in China's housing reform. Before 1994, actually, there was no commercial housing in China. Every family in China lives either in the rural area, which is those who have their own houses, or in the urban area, which actually rents an apartment from their work unit. By 1994 is when the work unit, it's become commercialized. You can have an option to buy the work unit at a discount price from the government. Okay, and I will incorporate that. Okay, and then we model. The model will be calibrated and estimated into in the Chinese economy during actually 1995 to 2015, 1994 to 2015, and then we use a calibrated model to do counterfactual analysis. In particular, we'll evaluate welfare gain and losses with different cohorts before and after the reform. The cohorts born before and after the 1994 housing reform. There's also 1998 housing reform when the mortgage became introduced. So between 94 and 98, there were no commercial mortgages. You buy apartment from the government or from the private commercial housing, but you have to pay everything out of pocket for that 5-year period. In 1998, in response to the Asian financial crisis, Chinese government decided to make housing sector a main engine of growth. And that's when the commercial mortgage became an instrument that was introduced by the People's Bank of China, and that that relaxed lots of borrowing constraints for a Chinese household to buy housing, and the housing prices start to take off, right? So we'll evaluate the role of housing privatization reform and compare housing reform to alternative pension reform to compensate for the early generations, to make them equivalent in welfare, for example, but through a pension reform rather through a housing reform, things like that, okay? So the paper is actually there's still some parts that need to be fixed, so it's a little bit of work in progress. The idea that asset prices have some redistributional consequences is not new when you started to think about read the literature broadly, right? So my colleague the Kruger, Lewis Rowe, and two co-authors had a JP paper showing that during the U.S. 2007-2009 great financial crisis, right? Housing and financial assets all depreciated a lot in value. So it was a big welfare loss for the elderly generation who owned lots of these assets, but it's a great buying opportunity for the young generation, right? So that it was the financial crisis or the great financial crisis is actually a big intergenerational wealth distribution within the cross section. So here we focus on the intergenerational redistribution, right? So the ideas are related but somewhat different. Okay. Now you may be thinking, what about housing types in Chinese housing market? So this is from Urban Household Survey, which asks respondents about whether they own a home and if so, what type of home do they own, right? Do they own? So lease is basically they're renting, right? Reform housing, this is the greens. These are the green are the reform housing. These are the housing that were previously owned by the government, and they put during the housing reform, these government-owned apartments were sold to households, and you can see that actually in early 2000, right? The green accounts for a large share of the Chinese housing stock. The commercial, the yellow one, started to pick up after 2000. And it's rising, right? But over time, commercial housing become a more and more important part of the Chinese housing stock. But until 2009, at least, there's the reform housing is still an important part of Chinese housing market. And now you want to ask, okay, how much capital gains are we talking about? This were looking at the housing price time series we have, and think about a hypothetical purchase of a 30 square meter apartment in 1995 at the housing price index in 1995, right? If you were to buy that 30 square meter housing price in 1995, and over time, the capital gains of that purchase relative to the initial wage, average wage in 1995, by 2015, we are talking about 28 times. The capital gain alone from purchasing a 30 square meter apartment in 1995 in the national average price, 20 years later, will be about 28 times of the wage in 1995. Right, but you may say 1995 wage is low. What about the relative to the current prevailing wage range, right? Prevailing wage. How much is the capital gain in 2015 relative to a 2015 average wage? We are still talking about 2 times more. But the capital gains are substantial, just for a small apartment of 30 square meters, right? You can also ask, okay, how much is the capital gain equivalent to the current average housing price? So if you buy a 30 square meter apartment in 1995, at the prevailing price in 1995, by 2015, that apartment can pay about close to 80% of the capital gain alone can pay about 80% of the prevailing average price of a 30 square meter apartment in 2015. Right? We are talking about very substantial capital gains. So, and if someone, right, in 1995, my dad's generation, they were the active workers in 1995. They were eligible to buy these government-owned houses at a subsidized rate if they hold on to it, or for some years, right? They can enjoy substantial capital gains, which they can use to trade up to buy a bigger commercial housing, or they can just sell and enjoy the sell and then rent and enjoy the capital gains to finance retirement consumption. So that's the kind of idea we are trying to explore. Okay, so the model we have to make some we are going to focus on housing decision. Okay, so some of the other decisions that people obviously make in the real world, such as labor supply, fertility, etc., we abstract from them, right? So each period a continuum of household is born. The population growth rate is NT, which we take as exogenous. The population growth rate NT will calibrate to the observed population growth rate and make assumptions about future population growth rate. And households live for a J periods and they retire at JW. So JW will be 60. J, we actually make it 90. Households enter the labor market at age 20. Okay. So, and then there's some survival rates, which we calibrate from estimate from the data. And oh, sorry, this one. Okay. And household preference, they value consumption. So S is a survival rate, right? The probability of a age J individual surviving into the next period, and this is the consumption, right? And this is consumption of numeric good, and this is the consumption of housing service. Okay. And we in China, it's very important to model requests. Right, so actually, in the end, our welfare results crucially depends on Chinese parents' unwavering preference to leave bequests to their children. So every generation, even the generations who were born later, who may be complaining about housing prices being too high, they are still well better off because their parents enjoy the rising housing price, and their parents have a lot of altruism that they will leave bequests to them. Right, so this is the bequest. IOTA is a measure of how strong the bequest motive is, and the B bar kind of tells you that bequest is luxury good. You won't leave any bequest until your consumption exceeds certain level, because the marginal so the marginal benefit of even if you leave zero bequest, there's already some positive. Right, the below bar tells you even at a zero bequest, the marginal utility you can get, the household can get from leaving bequest is not infinite. Okay, so there is some threshold. You have to be sufficiently wealthy. The parents will have to be sufficiently wealthy to decide to leave any positive bequest. Now, for bequests, there are two ways of model bequest. One is the barrel-backer way, where how much the parents value the bequest depends on how will the children use the bequest, the value that the bequest will bring to the children's children. Okay, that's the barrel-backer approach, and that will make the house problem a dynastic problem, right? Okay, so here the other approach is a warm glow approach model of bequest. Basically, parents will get the utility from leaving with bequest, regardless of how the children will use the bequest. That very act of leaving bequest makes the parents happy. I think Chinese parents are like that, and I decided to model it this way. But the truth is that it's much simpler. It breaks the problem, it avoids having to solve a dynastic problem. Okay, and another thing is that and also parents with probably 1 minus SJ, parents will die at the age J. And they, because the parents are forward-looking, they know they are going to live up to 90, so they will always have some the proportionate saving. And if they die, then whatever that was saved will become accidental bequest. Okay, and we assume, for simplicity, we assume that parents do not obtain utility from accidental bequest. And the bequests, so in every period, basically, some households, if they're alive, they are leaving inter vivo bequests while they are still alive, And some parents of different ages, they die and they leave accidental bequest. And we don't. So we basically wanted to simplify the problem. We assume that all the bequests live in period T, whether it's intermediate bequests or accidental bequests, they are pooled together and divided equally to give to the next generation of newborns. Newborns are basically people who just finish schooling and enter the labor market. Okay, that will give the newborns quite a bit of assets when they enter the labor market. That's actually very important a feature to have to explain a puzzling phenomenon in China, which is the young had a very high home ownership rate. Right, so without these bequests, there's no way to explain how come 30-year-olds in China have 50% home ownership rate. Okay, if you don't have one, you are the other 50%. Okay, so household income, after tax income, is so they receive income, which is a wage multiplied by the efficiency units. And they pay taxes, two taxes, a social security payroll tax and the income tax that are used to finance whatever other government expenditure the government may incur, including, for example, subsidy to the home purchases or the rental subsidies and so on. Okay, and the efficiency units of individual of age I in year T with skill level I, so they are individuals differ in skill, right? So is a product of the skill specific efficiency unit, human capital level lambda I. Lambda I is type I, education I level individuals human capital level, and then there is time fixed effect eta j, right? Eta j, j is age, so eta j is the life cycle income profile. There is a persistent income shock ZTI, and then idiosyncratic income shock eta TI. So these are estimated. There have been Microsoft, for example, and its co-authors have estimated these income processes, and we'll take these from the best estimates in the literature. Okay. Now, Social Security is introduced in China. So, interestingly, so if an individual become a retire, and the pension benefit level that the individual receive in year T when he's age J with the skill level I is given by this formula. Theta is the replacement rate. So 60% basically in China. Okay. Replacement rate is multiplied by some pensionable pension eligibility number. Okay. In China, the pension base, right, is actually a weighted average of two things. This one is the pre-retirement wage of this worker, his own wage, pre-retirement wage. Right. So if you calculate this is just the wage at the time when the individual reaches JW, the retirement age. Okay. The second component is you see is indexed by T minus 1. T is the period. So T minus 1 is last period's average social average wage. Right. So actually, in China, the pension system already have some index, partial index of indexing with the social average wage. So my dad, even if he didn't get opportunity to buy houses, his pension income in his retirement is not just a function of how much he earned before he retired. It was actually related to how much what is the social average wage. In reality, is this average wage is calculated at the risk pool level, typically a county or a city or sometimes province, right? But this is the model of national China as a whole average economy. So this is the social average wage of the whole country. Okay. And then we assume that the social security tax rate is determined to balance the government's in the temporal budget on social security. Okay, so housing. I know the time is very limited. I'm sure I'm not gonna finish. I'm gonna give you some idea of how we model things. Then I will go hopefully give you some results, some counterfactual results that are quite surprising, maybe too surprising for us to be fully comfortable. I have to say, but I will show you this, okay? So, but before housing reform, which started in 1994, the government owned all apartments. Okay, and the government assigned to each household some apartment size, and the rule of thumb is that if you are more educated, so in China is you are more educated, your apartment is a little bigger than if you are less educated. Now, in reality, if you have higher rent, you also get a little bit of apartment, but we don't have rent in our model, so we ignore that part. Okay, so houses were initially assigned according to education level, and does not appeal to any of the individual's preferences and so on. Okay, and no household born before period one, period one is 1994, own any house. They are all renters, and the rental rate is determined by the government. The economy is before 1994. We assume it's in a pre-reform steady state. Then the economy will eventually reach another steady state, maybe in 2100. Many years later, when population started growing, TIP started growing at a lower rate, the economy will eventually reach another steady state. And we'll interpret what we observe in the data from 1994 to say 2015 as the transition path from the pre-1994 pre-reform steady state to a very distant future steady state, which is probably happening in 2100. Okay, so we interpret that our data, the data we observe as a transition path between two steady states. Okay, now housing privatization in 1994, the when the reform started, all households can choose to rent a commercial apartment from a set, okay, at the market rate, or they can choose to purchase a home owner-occupied housing. And the thing is that these housing, the choices among the commercial market, the choice is much richer than the government assigned apartment units. The government have a small size, a bigger size, depending on the schooling level. If you have family of five, which was possible before the fertility started to decline rapidly, some families actually are cramped into a very small apartment. Not many choices. But if you were to go commercial, you can choose a more a house size more closer to your preference, right? The ideal point. Okay. And the second thing that what you can buy rent in the commercial market and what you can buy on the commercial market, the sizes are also the choices are also different. Okay, so one important thing about the housing reform, housing reform is actually enrichment of the choice set. Okay, and owner-occupied apartments provides housing service, which a bigger housing service. And housing service, if you're owner-occupied, is equal to zeta times h. If you rent, you just get h. Now, data could capture customization. You can make if you own it, you can make it look nice. Or importantly, in China, if you own it, you can enjoy the public goods, schooling, hospitals, and so on, that all renters could not enjoy. So data turns out to be quite big in China. People like to buy rather than rent because data is so good. Okay, and data is a parameter we will use to regulate the home ownership rate. Okay. Now, what about subsidized housing purchase? You subsidized in 1994. How much do you get subsidized? Well, only people who already were working in 1994. So I graduated in 1993. Some of my classmates just worked for a year, and they were able to buy the units that were assigned to them. They rented from the work unit at a subsidized price. But subsidy is if you are only entering the labor market in 1994. Just 1 year of experience, you get 18%. But if you are already in the labor, very senior in 1994, you can get close to 16% discount in 1994. The housing subsidy is related to your quote unquote age in 1994. How many years have you worked in 1994 when the housing reform started? Okay, and then in 1998. So between 1994 and 1998, you can, if I lived in a government provided apartment, I can buy it, or I can continue rent it at a discount rate, or I can rent commercial. or I can buy commercial, right? But after 1998, the rental discounted houses assigned by the government, that option is gone. Okay, and then but the government introduced mortgage market in 1998 with a 30% down payment rate. That's 1990, after 1998, right? Between 94 and 98, if you want to buy, whether you buy from the government or from the commercial market, you have to come up with everything yourself, no mortgage. Okay, so these are all part of the model. I will briefly introduce, kind of tell you how we differentiate renting versus owning in our model. The first thing is that the set of size options for commercial rental and owner occupied units may be different from what may be different, right? Rental, that's also true in the US. Like big houses for rental, that's very rare. Okay, so the choice set are different, option set are different. There's additional utility from owning rather than renting. I mentioned S equal to zeta H if you own it, and H if you rent, right? And from 1998 forward, home buyers, if you buy, you can get the mortgage with a 30% down payment. But renters, you don't have this option. You have to pay the rent out of their own pocket, right? Owner occupied housing carries a maintenance cost per period. While rental, you don't have to pay the maintenance cost. The reason we introduce this is that because housing does depreciate. If you don't, if we don't, so we are assuming that they pay this, owners pay this maintenance cost, but they get to enjoy the same age if you stay in the same apartment. Right. So if I don't have this maintenance cost, it means that this period I bought the HT, next period it become delta H times HT. So my apartment becomes smaller because of depreciation. So by introducing this physical cost of maintenance, it allows that if I bought HT last period, I will continue to enjoy HT this period, except that there is a cost of keeping that way to kind of compensate for the physical depreciation. And then if you own a house and later on sell it, there's some transaction cost. If you rent it, you are free to adjust your housing anytime you want. So all these 5 differences between renting and owning seem to be rather realistic. Okay, so I'm gonna skip this these pictures of and then close the model by introducing the production sectors. The final good production is the TFPAT and number of workers working in the consumption goods sector. Housing. New housing construction is a function of land supply and the number of construction workers and HT, and the total number of workers is allocated in equilibrium between the 2 sectors. Okay, and the land supply is taken to be exogenous. I mean, that's a very strong assumption. And we basically observe the residential land series over time, and then we take that. Okay. And then the rent and homeowner owner occupied housing price will have satisfy no arbitrage conditions, so that pins down the rent and housing prices over time. And the TFP time series will be kind of estimated from the wage data. Okay. Government need to choose the Social Security tax rate to balance the Social Security budget, right? Total amount of payments, income from collected Social Security tax income collected from the workers equal to the number of retiree payment to retirees. Then the other income, right? Other income tax TAO is chosen to balance the budget that includes the housing purchase subsidy, right? The housing price minus the government housing, subsidized government housing, multiplied by the measure of people who actually buy government housing, as well as the rent discount, right? So, of course, the government does a lot of other things. We assume that the other things that government does is set outside of the model. They have their own taxes and so on. So we only focus on the taxes that need to be collected to pay for the housing purchase subsidy and rent subsidy. Okay, equilibrium, I just need to be careful, and I can bore you to tears if I go through all these equations. And I will go to the calibration strategy. So the model is calibrated to the Chinese economy between 1994 to 2015. We interpret what we see in 1994 as a pre-reform steady state. And I already mentioned that after a long time in the future, Chinese economy will reach another steady state. And what we observed from 94 to 2015 in our data is a transition path between two steady states. Okay. And a bunch of parameters were set outside of the model. So so in one period is going to be 5 years. So individuals retired at 60, die for sure at 90, and they enter the labor market at age 21, which is my age when I entered the labor market. So that's basically right. Age-specific survival probability. We take it from the literature, and life cycle income profile is estimated in Hanming and Zhu's paper, and so on. Right. So and then this income process we took it from Michael and his co-author paper. Population dynamics. So basically, there are two time series of NT, the population growth. This is up till 2020. These were all from the data. We assume that from 20 to 2014, Chinese population will grow at 0, and then eventually, I think it's at 0, and then eventually it becomes slightly negative. Okay, a population decline. And TFP growth rate is calibrated from wages, so up till 2020, and then we assume that from 2020 to 2050, Chinese TFP will grow at 5%. From 2020 to okay, and then after 2050 it drops to 2%. So that is just then we assume that after 2050 you can see that population growth is steady and the TFP growth is steady, and we can have another balanced growth path, and we interpret what we see from 94 to 2015 as the transition from pre-94 balanced growth path to post 2100 kind of balanced growth path. And these parameters I'm gonna also let me just mention these are all the okay, this one. This is another. Okay, this may be quite this one. These were calibrated parameters using target moments, and for example, the utility premium from owning, we estimate to be 1.65. So owning a home delivers 65% more home services to than renting, and this is kind of ownership rate in 2000 played an important. The ownership rate in China in the data is 70%, right? And you in order to justify the high ownership rate, it requires the premium from owning to be high. The coefficient from bequest motive is very, this iota parameter is very important. This actually is an important data moment that is related to this value being high is the ownership rate of the old in 2000. But the old normally they shouldn't be holding their homes unless they want to leave the past. Another thing I want to mention is the skill premium, right? So the number 8, the high skilled workers have about 50% higher human capital level. The two apartments, of the government housing, small and large, is calibrated in this, and so on. And these are not non-target moments, and in terms of home ownership rate, so I think we matched pretty well. These were non-target by skill type, overall and by skill type, they match pretty well. By age, so this thing you can see that in China, in the data says 21 to 30-year-old, the ownership rate is already 57% in 2000. In 2005, this ownership rate is 55%. Okay, and our model initially had really big trouble in matching this rate. Now until we kind of made we modeled the past more seriously, and now we are able to match actually overshoot the young home ownership rate. But I think this right now this is the best we have. And these results may change in the future as we do more analysis. But anyway, so these are the out of non-target moments, and I think they did pretty well. But then we can ask, in 1994, right, the cohorts that were already in the labor market in 1994, we can kind of group them into four different growth cohorts. Right, these are the oldest ones, right, the ones who were born in between 1935 and 1939. They were already close to 60-year-olds, right? So you can see that for these cohorts, the blue one is reform housing. Right? So in 1994, a lot of them bought reform housing. Very few bought commercial housing, right? And then they started. You see that for this older cohort, their reform housing share started to decline, and the commercial housing started to increase. This is actually a sign of trading up. So these cohorts, right, they can get huge discount from the government from buying a government housing, right? Not ideal size, but they get huge discount. They bought it, the price appreciate, then at some point they cash it out and upgrade to a commercial housing of more desirable size, right? And for the young cohorts, born in 1965 to 69, right, their home ownership rate is low. When the reform started, right? So the blue one is reform housing. They do buy some reform housing, but their discount is relatively small. They did not have enough savings to actually pay for the whole government housing, even with the low price and the discount. So yeah, some people are buying government housing, but the rate is nowhere close to the older one. Okay, for multiple reasons, they get these older individuals in 94, they get bigger discounts, and also they have higher savings that can allow them to afford this. And trade-up turned out to be very important, right? So if you look at the demand for commercial housing, so the blue one is the population share of trade-up in the demand for population for commercial housing. In 2000, 60% of the buyers of new commercial housing were actually people who are trading up. They already own a home and they are trading up and so on. Right? So trade-up is very important. Okay, so now let me do the first counterfactual. Right? What's the role of housing reform? Right? If there's no, so we can think about making two modifications to the 1994 housing reform. One is you can still buy in 1994. You can still buy the government housing, but you cannot get subsidy. So that's the first one. Remove the purchase subsidy to those born, meaning I entered the labor market before 94, but they can still buy it. It's just they have to pay for the whole full price of the government housing. Or you can completely eliminate the housing reform, meaning that they cannot, the government houses will just be removed from the market. They can, if they want to buy, they can only buy the commercial housing. Okay, so this was a surprising result, right? So we found that this blue one is the housing price dynamics over time under the benchmark. Now, without the purchase subsidy, but still you can buy the government housing at full price. That's the red, and the green one is no market for reform housing at all. The initial housing prices actually will be higher under the alternative reform, under alternative schemes. Okay, so the reason is that here a lot of people under in the benchmark, a lot of the government individual initial cohorts, they bought the government housing without the subsidy. No one buys the government housing. What do? They actually rent larger apartments in the commercial market. So the housing price here, the commercial housing price is yeah. So actually, without the subsidy, people live in bigger apartments because they are basically they don't enjoy the subsidy from the government, so they might as well just move to a bigger apartment. Okay, so anyway, that's actually I'm gonna do this thing. So imagine that we can compare individuals welfare of different birth cohorts. right? Those cohorts mean this is the cohort of individuals entered the labor market in 1995. Okay, and think about the benchmark as delivering the individual's utility. The benchmark is 0, right? And these are the consumption equivalents of the different cohorts under the two alternative regimes: no purchase subsidy or no market for reform housing completely. These negative numbers saying that every cohort after 1995, they are actually worse off had the housing reform of 1994 did not take place. So you may be surprised, okay, how come, right? I mean, a lot of people, recent cohorts were complaining about the housing being expensive. Now, the key thing is, I'm probably will stop this in this one, is that the bequest, right? So it turns out that under the benchmark, the parents are leaving a lot more bequest. The parents enjoy the appreciation capital gains from housing. The housing price actually become higher for the older generations eventually, but the parents are not stingy. They leave the bequest to their children, compensating for the adverse kind of prices that the young generation would have to face when they purchase homes, right? But because of parents' generosity, both for the skilled, unskilled workers and the skilled workers, they are actually both better off. All cohorts of unskilled and skilled workers are better off under the housing reform than under no purchase subsidy or no housing reform at all scenario. I will so the last, maybe I'll just say something. What if the economy slows down, right? So instead of growing 5% from 2010 onwards, so here it was growing more than 5% between 2010 to 2020. Now we assume that from 2010, the economy unexpectedly started to slow down to 5%. Okay, what happens to the government debt, to the housing reform, to the government deficit? And the housing reform under the benchmark versus under an alternative pension reform that compensates the initial cohorts in a way to make them equally well off under the benchmark than under the pension reform. So basically, the pension scheme become more generous. Now that when the economy unexpectedly slow down, the pension reform scheme will result in much larger deficit for the government. Okay, so I'm gonna conclude here. We propose a new channel of intergenerational transfer in a fast-growing economy like China. The government subsidizes early cohorts for home purchases when privatized the housing market. The initial generation may sell the houses, reap the capital gains to finance retirement consumption, even though they largely miss the chance of enjoying rising wage income. We develop a quantitative framework to evaluate the welfare effects, and we found that all future cohorts are better off with the 1994 housing reform than without, and the parental bequest played an important role in making sure that the new generations were, despite facing higher prices and a lot of seemingly unfavorable conditions, they are better off because of that their parents were made so much better off as a result of the housing price improvement. And last thing I may just say, well, why housing special? If you use assets, why housing assets? The USS, when Soviet Union collapsed, actually the most of the state-owned assets were actually distributed to the former citizens of former USSR as financial assets. Unfortunately, these financial assets are not a necessity. Like they actually were sold to the oligarchs at a very discount price. Instead, the Russians did not hold on to these financial assets. Okay, and the partial wage indexing does happen in Germany and the UK. And I think, and I don't know how relevant is this particular mechanism for other countries, but I think this idea that assets could play a role in intergenerational redistribution of wealth might be relevant to other countries, but we haven't explored. So I will stop here and take some questions, maybe if I have any minutes left. Maybe not.
Okay, wonderful. Hanming, this was really wonderful. Any questions for Hanming with the 5 minutes?
And that's very, very interesting. So I wonder when the government sell the work unit, how do they determine the price?
Okay. So the government housing supply. Yeah, so these are the prices are the government housing and commercial housing. They are both appearing in the housing supply, and the prices are determined by unit price are determined by the market equilibrium. Right, so yes, I didn't go through this, but this is thing. Yeah, so there's a complicated, yeah, so, yeah, the prices, these are housing prices, right? They are determined, I'm sorry, the housing prices are determined. Yeah, so it's determining equilibrium.
So in the model is determined by the equilibrium.
Yeah.
So taking into consideration that the work unit housing is much smaller unit, maybe the conditions worse, not as nice as the commercial unit, that sort of things.
Right, so when we measure we in the model, we have two sizes of government housing, a small one and a bigger one. And these sizes are already incorporating whatever quality differences between the government apartments and the commercial apartments. Right, so the house, because the area, the H is really what is the quality included, quality inclusive. It's because that's where the H enters the utility function to deliver housing service. If the government apartment is, not good quality, doesn't matter. Yeah, so the area, quote unquote area, is already incorporating some of the quality dimensions.
And in reality, does the government also sort of look at the commercial market price and use that to calibrate what the price should be for the work unit?
Yes, and then if you are eligible to buy these government units at discount, they give you the discount. So the household only pay the discounted price. Yeah. If the household buy commercial, then they don't get a discount.
Any other questions? We'll have one more. And
Thanks, Hanming, for the excellent talk. I wonder how you think about the rising housing prices in China over the last 20 years. How did your model capture that? Is it like the limited housing supply, increasing demand, or people's anticipation about housing price appreciation, also people's kind of confidence about economic growth?
So the housing, so that's a great question. Actually, we have another counterfactor that I didn't report. In China, a lot of people buy houses for both for consumption purpose and for investment purpose. In the model, interestingly, in reality, these both motives are present. In the model, actually, you can shut down the investment purchase by assuming that all the capital gains you get from houses will be taxed at 100%. And then ask individuals to decide how much house they will buy, and that's at 100% capital gains tax rate. All the choices of home size is for consumption purpose, and then we can compare the housing price dynamics under this housing is only for living 房住不炒这个 scenario. Under that scenario, it turns out the housing price will also appreciate significantly. The path is in terms of the slope is almost similar to the observed benchmark price dynamics. The level will be about 30% lower. That's what we found. But the most of the housing price growth in China is driven by fundamentals, the income growth, the productivity growth, and until now the population growth is driving the housing price appreciation. Speculation changes the level somewhat, but it will not kill off the housing price increase at all, even if you tax the capital gains at 100%.
One more question.
Just wonder how big is the role of informal labor market?
Sorry?
How big is the role of informal labor market in China? Because in your model, you use the personal income tax to balance the economic budget. But if you also introduce the large informal market, you will also result in like intergenerational redistribution from the formal group to the informal group.
Right, so that's, yeah, so informal market is not in the model. In reality, there is informal market. So our model does not capture so actually, another important thing that our model does not capture is that, here we are basically saying, in China, there is also big regional differences, right? To the extent that a lot of the rich people in western part of China, they use their the savings to buy houses in east coast of China, right? So driving up the prices in richer provinces, the kind of mechanism actually here it will exacerbate regional inequality, right? So again, we don't have that mechanism. This is a model of the whole country, but in follow-up work, we are trying to bring in this regional differences, and individuals in different regions can decide where to buy houses, whether to buy in their home region or in another region. If they don't have hukou, if there's hukou restriction, buying home in not outside of the home region may result in some discounts in the home service and so on. So that will this using asset the housing market privatization, I believe will contribute to the big increase in regional inequality. Now, informal market, I haven't thought about it, but it's an interesting question.
Okay. We're running out of time. We need to go for coffee, but if there is one more, otherwise, another round of applause for.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, so we have 10 minutes for coffee outside, and the parallel sessions start at 9:40.